Peace everyone, Unmasked here, and today I will be coloring these oranges. On the left side of the screen you'll notice that I have the color palette, and once again the paper I am working on is Stonehenge Vellum. So let's go ahead and get started. So I began by doing just a quick sketch, just throwing some circles on. The kind of style and effect that I approached this drawing on is a very painterly kind of approach. I did my beginning layers very broad, and then I work my details out of those layers. And for those that support me on Patreon, the real-time version of this drawing is available to you now. So I started off with my 030 color, and I did a couple layers of the 810, and basically I'm just kind of defining my shapes at this point. I'm using my 030 most of the time. I do go in with the 069 a little bit, the dark shadow, and then I switch over to the 061 pencil, and that's where I start to establish some of the shadows and darker spots on the oranges. And then I go through with my odorless paint thinner and blend out those first initial coats of color. And you can see it brings out some of the saturation of the color and also smooths out some of the pencil strokes. Like I said, I'm going for much more of a painterly approach in this. I did most of my coloring very broad in the beginning, and then I didn't bring out the details until the end. I'm going through now with my 061 and really getting those reds in the shadows and just making the transitions much smoother. Using the 810 to bring in some of the yellows on the cut piece of the orange. And I'm using the 061 to really define that sharp edge along the background. I used the 002 there on the white part of the orange, and I blended out the odorless paint thinner just so that it's not white. I didn't want it to be white because it would look unnatural. Now I'm going through and getting some of the darker shadows with the 069, and over top of that I go with the 061 just to keep the shadows saturated. Now I'm using the 876 and the 030 to darken up the colors, and then I use the paint thinner to smooth them back out. I'm going pretty quick. This drawing only took about an hour and a half to do, so the real-time version is a bit quicker than the last video. Now I'm using my 061 to start building up some of the texture. Basically I'm just doing small circles and dots, and I'm using a really light hand because I'm going to go through again with the odorless paint thinner and blend it out. But I want the texture to show through, so I'm using really delicate brush strokes, and I'm drying off my brush quite a bit. I use a little bit of the 069 for the darker parts of the orange, and then I use the 810 to bring out some of the yellow highlights, and then I switch to my 801 to really bring out some of the brighter parts of the orange. The 801 is kind of a creamy white off color, and so it's not completely white. And I'm just going through layering those colors over and over again, bringing out the texture and working out the values of the orange. Now I'm going through with my 801 again, and I'm putting little dots to create those little shined, raised orange peel kind of effect, using some of the 810 and the 030 just to resaturate everything and doing mostly dots. I switched to the 876 to add the little dimples, the darker spots, and that's what really brings the orange to life. I do a couple final layers of 061, 876, and 030 with a little bit of the 810 to highlight, and then that's it for that one. And I start on the top orange, and I do pretty much the same thing, layering the 030, 810, and 801. And then I use a little bit of the 069 to sharpen the edges. When I'm using my paint thinner here, I'm doing small little dabs instead of brushing it, just to let the paint thinner itself kind of blur the color out just a bit because I want to maintain all the detail that I put into it. And the technique that I used on the first orange is the same exact thing that I'm doing on the second one here. I'm using the same colors to create the texture slowly. I'm using the 061 to get kind of the reddish shadows, and then I use a little bit of the 876 and the 069 for the shadows. The shadows that occur in between the three oranges there is mostly 069 with a touch of the 061 and the 046. One of the things I use the 069 really sharp to create the edge, the bottom edge of the orange, and then I use the 030 very sharply to create the edge of the top, and that really brings the orange off of the page to make it show up better. And then of course I'm using the 801 to create the white highlights, doing little specks here and there to create that orange peel texture. And then again, I use the 876 to create all the little dark dimple spots. I also use that to outline the stem and make those minor details there. And then of course I go through and I blend it out. And like I said, I'm not using brush strokes. I'm kind of just dabbing the brush on there and kind of pushing the pigment into the paper as opposed to around the paper. Now I'm going here and doing the shadow. I start with the 876. I go over top of that with the 002, and then over top of that with the 801. The 002 is kind of a cool white. It's really almost a light blue. It's such a cool color, and the reason I went with that is because the cool blue kind of contrasts with the really rich bright oranges, and so it kind of creates a really nice dynamic shadow. And I use the 069 and the 046 for the darkest parts of the shadow, and I take the 049 really sharply and I kind of cut off the edge there at the bottom of the orange just to get that really dark, rich shadow. And the 046 is kind of a really dark brown color, but it's a bit desaturated, which is nice for the shadow. Kind of brings in the cooler tones. Now I'm working on the cut orange, and basically all I'm doing here is using the 030 and the 810, and I'm making sure all my pencil strokes are going in the direction of the texture. I'm really not trying to add a lot of detail, and then I go back with the 801 and do the same thing, and then I blend it out. And I just kind of do that a couple times until I get the right color and the right values. And because I'm making sure all my pencil strokes are in the right direction, the texture and the detail just come right out of the piece. I'm not even trying at this point. And then I lightly brush that with my odorless paint thinner to just soften it a little bit and blend the colors together. And there you have it. That is the final piece. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to help support my channel, head over to my Patreon page where I have the real-time version of this drawing available. Also, be sure to let me know what you'd like to see me draw next time in the comments. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace.